7 years after my wedding, I realized something that should never take 7 years to understand. The man I was married to was a stranger. I didn't arrive at that conclusion during a fight. There was no betrayal uncovered in real time, no raised voices, no confession that forced clarity. It came later quietly after I opened a door I had been told, repeatedly and calmly, not to touch. A door that led into my mother-in-law's house. A house, my husband said, was under endless renovation. A house I was never allowed to visit. When I finally stood there, alone, with the key in my hand, what I saw inside stopped my body cold. My hands shook. My breath locked in my chest. Not because it was shocking in the way people expect, but because it was precise, deliberate, built. What was behind that door was worse than anything I had prepared myself for. But before I get there, I need to explain how this began. It was March. Late winter. The kind that drains color from the city and leaves everything exposed. I was sitting by the window of our apartment, watching wind push dirty snow into tight circles around the streetlights. Chicago looked exhausted. Gray sky. Gray streets. Buildings reduced to shapes. From the outside, my life matched the building I lived in. New, polished, secure. Our condo was part of a recently developed complex downtown. 3 bedrooms, clean lines, neutral tones, everything designed to signal stability. My husband, Marcus, worked in energy infrastructure management. He earned more than enough for both of us. After we married, I left my job in healthcare, not because he demanded it. Marcus never demanded. He persuaded. "You've done enough," he would say. "I've got us now." And on paper, he did. I sat there with a mug in my hands. The tea inside had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. That happened more often than I like to admit. From the kitchen, Marcus asked if I wanted eggs. His voice was calm, familiar, exactly where it was supposed to be. He brought the plate over and set it down in front of me carefully. I noticed the mug again. It was a gift from our last anniversary. Gold lettering, already peeling. I remember thinking that gold shouldn't fade that fast. We talked about nothing important. Work schedules, a delayed train line, normal things, the kind of conversation couples have when nothing feels wrong. Then he mentioned his mother. "She's been asking when we're coming out," he said casually. Helen lived in Cedar Grove, a small town about an hour outside the city. I had been there once, years ago. Since then, it had become a place I wasn't meant to access. "The house still isn't ready," he added, before I could ask. Still. That word had been holding our reality together for a long time. "How long has the renovation been going on now?" I asked. Marcus paused, just long enough to measure his response. He took a bite of eggs, chewed, swallowed. "You know how old houses are," he said. "You fix one thing, 10 more come up." It sounded reasonable. I'd said the same thing myself to friends. I nodded, but something about the way he delivered it felt practiced, like a line he'd used before. "I could come with you next time," I said, "just to see her." He looked up, only for a second. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. "If you weren't watching closely, you'd miss it." I almost did. "There's nothing to see," he said. "Dust, noise. It's uncomfortable." "I don't mind uncomfortable." "I do," he replied, smiling. And that was it. No argument, no raised voice. He didn't forbid me. He never needed to. He simply made the idea feel unnecessary, inconvenient, slightly unreasonable. That was how Marcus controlled things. Not with force, with logic. I had met Helen only a handful of times. She was quiet, observant. The last time I saw her, she hugged me longer than expected. Her hand rested on my back like she was holding on to something. At the time, I thought it was affection. Now, I understand it differently. After that visit, communication faded. Calls went unanswered. Marcus always had explanations. Bad reception, a broken phone, doctor's orders. He handled her appointments, her prescriptions, her finances. He said it was easier that way. I believed him. If you were in my situation, you probably would have too. Because nothing was obviously wrong. There were no scenes, no warnings, just a series of quiet decisions that kept me away from one specific place. That night, after dinner, Marcus sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. I folded laundry. Familiar movements, predictable sounds. His work boots were by the door, clean, perfectly positioned. Always. Before bed, he asked if I was okay. I said yes. He kissed my forehead, brief, controlled, like punctuation. I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. Not afraid, not anxious, just aware. There was a part of my life I wasn't allowed to see. Not openly, not aggressively, but consistently. And consistency, I would later learn, is how secrets survive. From the outside, there was nothing to question. That's what made it effective. Marcus and I moved through the city like a well-designed system. Mornings followed a rhythm, coffee brewed at the same time, news playing softly in the background. His suit jackets hung evenly spaced in the closet, color coordinated without being obsessive. My days were quieter after I left healthcare, not empty, just controlled. People often assume leaving work creates absence. For me, it created silence. And silence can feel like peace if you don't examine it too closely. Marcus framed everything as protection. "You were burning out," he told me when I hesitated about resigning. "This way, you can breathe. Focus on us." There was always an us in his sentences. It made decisions feel shared even when they weren't. He handled the finances without resistance from me. He was good at it. That part was true. Our accounts were organized, bills paid early, credit spotless, investments diversified. He showed me summaries, never raw data, charts instead of statements, overviews instead of transaction records. It looked responsible. It looked like care. Friends admired him. Men asked for advice. Women told me I was lucky. Marcus remembered birthdays, sent thank you notes, donated to causes with his name attached. He never forgot to open doors or pull out chairs. His manners were consistent, not performative. If you were in my situation, you wouldn't have called this control. You would have called it stability. The first year of marriage passed quietly. So did the second. By the third, Cedar Grove had already faded into a concept rather than a place. Marcus visited his mother regularly, once every few weeks, sometimes overnight, sometimes just for the day. He never complained about the drive. When I asked how Helen was doing, his answers were detailed but distant. Numbers, medication names, appointment times, enough specificity to feel informed, never enough to feel involved. "She gets tired easily," he'd say. "It's better if things stay calm." Calm was his preferred condition. I suggested we bring her into the city for a weekend. He said the noise was bad for her blood pressure. I suggested video calls. He said she hated cameras. I suggested writing letters. He said she struggled with her hands. Every idea had an explanation waiting for it. Marcus never said no directly. He let circumstances decline on his behalf. The renovation became a standing explanation. It explained why we couldn't visit, why photos were never shared, why timelines kept shifting. It also justified money moving quietly out of our accounts. "Old houses hide problems," he'd say. "You don't know what you're dealing with until you open the walls." That sentence stayed with me later. At the time, it sounded like experience. The one time I did press, gently, he didn't argue. He reframed. "You trust me, right?" he asked, not defensively. Calmly. "Yes," I said. "Then let me handle this," he replied. "You don't need that stress." That was Marcus's gift. He made exclusion feel like relief. My days filled themselves with small routines. Groceries, gym sessions, volunteer shifts that didn't require credentials. I kept my certifications active, just in case. Marcus supported that too. "Options are healthy," he said. "But options that are never exercised become theoretical." Helen existed in our life like a footnote, mentioned often enough to seem present, never enough to be real. When holidays came, Marcus insisted we stay in the city. "She's tired," he'd say. "Travel's hard on her." I sent gifts, carefully chosen ones, soft blankets, herbal teas, framed photos of us. Marcus always said she loved them. She said to tell you thank you, he'd report. She doesn't like talking on the phone much anymore. Once, I asked if I could call her directly. He didn't say no. He said, maybe later. Today isn't a good day. Later kept moving. I didn't push because pushing felt unnecessary. Our marriage wasn't strained. We weren't disconnected. Marcus came home on time. We ate together. We slept in the same bed. He never raised his voice. Never criticized my appearance. Never controlled where I went. That's the kind of man people defend instinctively. That's the kind of man no one suspects. Looking back, I can see how my own professionalism worked against me. In healthcare, you're trained to look for clear symptoms, acute changes, red flags that announce themselves. Marcus's behavior wasn't acute. It was chronic, low-grade, long-term. Designed to be tolerated. The condo stayed immaculate. Cleaning service twice a month, repairs handled promptly, everything fixed quickly, problems removed before they lingered. Except one. Cedar Grove. It remained unfinished by design. Always just enough wrong to justify distance, always just enough progress to justify patience. And patience, when extended indefinitely, becomes compliance. I didn't feel trapped. That's important. I felt chosen, protected, provided for. If someone had asked me then whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation. Yes. What I didn't know yet was that trust doesn't require proof until it does. And once proof becomes relevant, the structure you're standing on matters more than how stable it once felt. I didn't question my marriage in those years. I lived inside it, comfortably. Which is why, when the first real inconsistency appeared, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like curiosity. And curiosity, unlike fear, doesn't announce itself. It waits. The shift didn't happen all at once. That's important to understand. No single moment made me stop trusting Marcus. There was no alarm bell. What changed was the pattern, quiet, repetitive, consistent enough to blend into routine. After a while, I realized that every piece of information about Helen reached me through him. Every update. Every decision. Every explanation. If you were in my situation, you might not notice it at first either. When someone volunteers information regularly, you don't immediately question what's missing. You assume transparency because you're being spoken to. Marcus talked about his mother often, just not directly. She had a follow-up today, he'd say. Blood pressure's stable. The doctor adjusted her dosage. Specific, clinical, reassuring. But he never said, she asked about you. End quote. It is problem in sport inherently found. I noticed that absence before I noticed anything else. I tried calling Helen again one afternoon while Marcus was out. The phone rang. Once, twice, then stopped. No voicemail, no message, just silence. I tried again the next day. Same result. When Marcus came home, I mentioned it casually. Not as a concern. Just an observation. The call didn't go through, I said. He didn't look up from his phone. She forgets to charge it, he replied. I'll remind her. Alder sighed. There was no irritation in his voice. No defensiveness. That's what made it effective. A defensive response invites follow-up. His response closed the subject. Days passed. Then weeks. I stopped trying. Not because I didn't care, but because every attempt ended in a logical explanation that made persistence feel unnecessary, slightly intrusive, even. Marcus was good at that. He didn't stop you directly. He made you stop yourself. The last time I'd spoken to Helen directly was over a year earlier. Her voice had sounded thinner than I remembered. We didn't talk long. She didn't ask about the city, or my plans, or our life together. She said one thing that stayed with me. You should ask Marcus, she said. He knows when it's right for you to come. At the time, I heard deference. Later, I understood it as permission she didn't have authority to grant. From then on, every attempt at connection required approval, not formally. Subtly. Timing mattered. Conditions mattered. Her health mattered. She was always too tired, or resting, or advised not to engage. and Marcus was always there to manage it. I began noticing how he positioned himself in conversations involving her. When her name came up unexpectedly, he answered too quickly. When neighbors from Cedar Grove called, he stepped into another room. Not hiding, filtering. Once, I suggested sending a care package. Nothing elaborate. Just something personal. She doesn't like clutter, he said. It stresses her. Another time, I mentioned visiting just the town, no house. Lunch nearby. There's no point, he replied. She wouldn't be up for it. He spoke on her behalf with absolute confidence, as if her preferences were fixed data points. In healthcare, when a patient loses their voice, someone else speaks for them. That arrangement can be necessary. It can also be abused. I didn't accuse Marcus of anything. I didn't even label what I was feeling. I was still operating under trust. But a new behavior replaced my assumptions. I observed. I started noticing how rarely Helen initiated anything. No cards, no notes, no messages passed through Marcus that sounded like her voice. Everything he relayed felt summarized, interpreted. I wondered why a woman with chronic health issues lived alone in a house under constant construction. I wondered why every attempt to reduce distance was framed as dangerous. I wondered why I was being protected from someone who was supposedly fragile. But I kept those questions to myself, because asking them out loud would have shifted the dynamic too early. The house in Cedar Grove became something else in my mind. Not a place. An omission. A gap in the narrative of my marriage. It was the one location my life did not extend to. And that kind of absence doesn't happen accidentally. One evening, after dinner, Marcus mentioned Cedar Grove again. They're finally replacing the wiring, he said. Took forever to get permits. City permits? I asked. No, he said quickly. County. I nodded. Then paused. Which county? He smiled. You're asking like it matters. That was the moment. Not because he smiled, but because he didn't answer. It wasn't a lie. It was a deflection. Smooth enough to pass unnoticed unless you were already paying attention. From that point on, I was. I noticed how often Cedar Grove was discussed in vague terms. They, the place, out there, rarely by name, as if specificity might invite scrutiny. I noticed how Marcus's posture changed when the topic surfaced. Shoulders tightening slightly, breathing shallow, a subtle shift most people would miss. I wasn't afraid. I was confused. Confusion is quieter than fear. It doesn't rush you toward conclusions. It invites you to gather data. And data, when collected patiently, has a way of rearranging the truth. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't demand to see the house. I didn't insist on calling Helen again, because I didn't yet know what I was dealing with. And when information is incomplete, pressure creates distortion. So I waited. And Marcus continued exactly as before, which, in hindsight, was the most telling behavior of all. The first time Marcus raised his voice at me, it wasn't during an argument. It was during a question. It was late. Well past midnight. I hadn't gone to bed. I was sitting on the edge of the couch with the lights low, waiting. I told myself I wasn't worried. I told myself I was just awake. When the door finally opened, cold air rushed in with him. Marcus stepped inside, closed the door, and kicked off his boots near the entryway. That's when I saw it. The soles were thick with wet, reddish-brown mud, heavy, fresh. I stared at them longer than I should have. Chicago winters don't leave room for that kind of dirt. By February, the ground is frozen solid. No soft earth, no wet clay, just ice and packed snow. I didn't accuse him. I didn't raise my voice. I pointed. Where did that come from? I asked. Marcus froze. Not dramatically. Just enough to register. Then he answered too quickly. I helped a friend, he said, digging out a shed foundation. In this weather? I asked. My tone stayed even. Observational. That's when his voice changed. What is this? He said sharply. An interrogation? It wasn't shouting. It didn't need to be. The edge was enough to break the rhythm of the room. I didn't move. I didn't match his energy. The ground is frozen, I said. 3 feet down. He stepped closer. His shoulders tightened. His jaw set. I'm doing everything I can for my mother, he said. Everything. And this is what I come home to? There it was. The pivot. He framed himself as the one under attack, the one sacrificing, the one being unfairly questioned. You should be ashamed, he added. That word landed deliberately. I didn't respond. Silence. When someone expects resistance, forces them to confront their own escalation. Marcus stared at me for a moment longer, then turned away. He muttered something under his breath and went into the bedroom. The door closed. The conversation ended. Or so it appeared. I lay awake long after he fell asleep. Not crying, not angry, unsettled. Because anger isn't about the question being asked. It's about the fear behind it. The next morning, Marcus acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, asked if I slept well, kissed my cheek before leaving. Too normal. 2 days later, he brought home a small velvet box. Inside were diamond studs, expensive, carefully chosen. We've both been under stress, he said lightly. I thought you might like these. I did like them. That wasn't the point. What mattered was the timing. He followed it with dinner reservations at a steakhouse we rarely went to, the kind of place where the receipt feels like a declaration. I accepted both, calmly, without comment. Not because I was appeased, because I was paying attention. From then on, I watched Marcus the way I used to observe patients whose symptoms didn't align with their charts. I noted patterns. When he lied, his sentences became longer, more detailed. When he felt cornered, he introduced moral framing, family, duty, sacrifice. When he was truly relaxed, he spoke very little. And every time Cedar Grove entered the conversation, his body reacted before his words did. He began checking in more often. Everything okay? You seem quiet. Are we good? They weren't questions seeking answers. They were temperature checks. He wanted reassurance that the system was still holding. I gave him none. I didn't withdraw affection. I didn't change routines. I remained consistent, predictable, calm. Consistency keeps people comfortable. It also keeps them careless. The boots stayed by the door for days, cleaned, lined up again. But I remembered the weight of the mud, the way it clung. That detail didn't belong to any explanation he'd given me. And once something doesn't belong, it doesn't disappear. It waits. I didn't confront him again, because confronting too early gives someone time to refine their narrative. Instead, I adjusted my internal framework. I stopped assuming Marcus was telling me the truth, and I started treating everything he said as unverified information. That wasn't suspicion. That was preparation. The call came on a Saturday morning. That alone was unusual. We didn't have visitors. We didn't get calls at the door. Our life was scheduled, filtered, predictable. When the intercom buzzed, Marcus reacted before I did. He stood up too quickly, alert in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. On the screen was a man in a wool coat, holding a leather briefcase, professional, composed. "I'm here to see Marcus Quinn," he said. "My name is Nathan Cole. I'm an attorney." Marcus glanced at me before answering. Just a flicker. Then he buzzed the man in. We sat in the living room. The attorney opened his briefcase and removed a folder. His movements were careful, practiced, the kind that comes from delivering information people don't expect to hear. "I'll be brief," he said. "A neighbor from Cedar Grove contacted my office last month. She was concerned about the prolonged absence of Mrs. Helen Quinn." I felt my hands tighten around the mug I was holding. 32 days ago, he continued, Mrs. Quinn passed away in the county hospital. Acute renal failure, secondary to chronic illness. The words landed cleanly, no emotion attached. Just facts. I turned to Marcus. He covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. A sound escaped him that resembled a sob. It was timed, controlled, convincing enough for someone who wasn't watching closely. I was watching closely. "What?" I asked. My voice didn't break. "She died a month ago?" Marcus nodded, still hiding his face. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said. "I didn't want to upset you. A month. A full month where his mother had been dead while I folded laundry, cooked dinner, and listened to him talk about renovation delays." The attorney slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents, a death certificate, property records, a deed. According to the will on file, he said, Mrs. Quinn left her property to her son, Marcus Quinn, as sole heir. He placed a small set of keys next to the papers. When the attorney left, the apartment felt different, not quieter, vacant. I looked at Marcus. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why didn't I know she was sick enough to die?" He looked up then. His eyes were red, dry. "She was ashamed," he said. "The house, her condition. I didn't want you to see her like that." The explanation came too easily, like it had been rehearsed. "Where is she buried?" I asked. He hesitated. Just long enough to notice. "I'll take you when things settle," he said. He gathered the envelope and the keys, stood up, and walked into his office. I heard the drawer open, then close, then lock. The sound was precise, final. I didn't follow him. I didn't ask for the documents. I didn't demand answers. Because something had just clarified itself. This wasn't grief management. This was information control. Over the next few days, Marcus played the role of a grieving son. He sat in silence, stared at nothing, spoke softly. But when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression shifted. It wasn't loss. It was vigilance. He was monitoring outcomes, watching reactions, assessing risk. That's not grief. That's protection of an asset. He told me he needed to travel for work the following week. "North Dakota," he said. "Pipeline incident. They need someone senior on site. Urgent. Important. Sacrificial. I'll be gone 10 days, he added. Maybe 2 weeks. "Okay," I said. That was it. The absence of reaction unsettled him. He studied my face, waiting for concern, reassurance, negotiation. None came. The night before he left, I noticed how carefully he packed. Shirts folded flat, phone in his hand more than usual, messages typed, then deleted. Once, a private smile crossed his face. It didn't belong to grief. At 5 in the morning, he kissed my forehead. I kept my eyes closed. His lips felt cold, procedural. When the door closed behind him, I waited until his footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Then I got out of bed. I knew exactly where to start. Marcus's office was locked, but he was predictable. In the pocket of his work jeans, always the same one, he kept the small key to the desk drawer. The spare key to the office door sat in the top drawer of the hallway dresser. He never imagined I would look. I opened the drawer. I opened the office. I opened the desk. Inside was the envelope the attorney had delivered, the property documents, the keys to the house in Cedar Grove. Beneath them was a thick folder labeled Cedar Grove, Renovation. I opened it expecting contracts, permits, work orders. There were none, only receipts, hundreds of them. Home improvement stores, lumber yards, appliance suppliers, furniture warehouses, month after month, year after year. I did the math carefully, just under $400,000. Renovations leave evidence. Before and after photos, contractors, city permits. This folder had none of that. Tucked between the receipts was a handwritten note, not Marcus's handwriting. Younger, rounded. "She's out of pills again. Need to buy urgently." She. Not Helen. Not Mom. She. At that moment, the uncertainty ended. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was structural. I closed the folder, and I made a decision that didn't require permission, approval, or discussion. I was going to Cedar Grove. I didn't rush. That's the part people misunderstand later. They expect panic, or rage, or a sudden confrontation driven by emotion. What I felt was momentum. Once the folder closed, the situation stopped being personal. It became logistical. Marcus had structured his life around predictability, mine included. That worked in my favor. I took cash from the emergency envelope he kept in the safe. Not enough to trigger alerts, enough to move without friction. I left my phone on the nightstand, plugged in and powered on. Digital presence creates comfort. Physical absence creates delay. An hour later, I was on a Greyhound bus heading towards Cedar Grove. As the city receded behind me, something unfamiliar settled in. Not fear, not anger. clarity. The bus ride was quiet. I watched the landscape shift from concrete to open road, suburbs thinning out, trees appearing more frequently. The kind of gradual transition Marcus had always described as inconvenient. It wasn't. Cedar Grove didn't look the way he'd described it. There was no decay, no half-abandoned streets, no evidence of a town stuck waiting for something to be finished. The roads were clean, the storefronts open. Cars moved slowly, deliberately, like people weren't in a hurry to leave. It smelled like pine and wood smoke. Lived in. Ordinary. I stepped off the bus and stood still for a moment. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because the narrative I'd been given no longer applied. I stopped at a small grocery store near the main road. The cashier looked at me a second longer than necessary. Curious, assessing. "You visiting someone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Helen Quinn." Her expression shifted immediately. "Oh," she said softly. "I'm sorry. She passed a while back." "How long ago?" I asked. "Over a month," she said. "Quiet service, churchyard burial." A month. Again. Consistency matters when you're validating information. I thanked her and asked for directions to the house. She pointed me toward Pine Street without hesitation. As I walked, another realization settled in. People here knew Helen. They knew Marcus. And yet, no one had ever contacted me. That wasn't an oversight. On Pine Street, I stopped. The house in front of me wasn't under renovation. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't waiting for repairs. It was finished. 2 stories. Light siding, new windows, manicured lawn, a high metal fence enclosing the property like a deliberate boundary. No construction vehicles, no debris, no permits posted. Everything Marcus had told me collapsed quietly. An older woman appeared in the neighboring yard, leaning on a rake. She studied me openly. "You looking for someone?" she asked. "I'm Marcus Quinn's wife," I said. "Helen was my mother-in-law." Her hand slipped from the rake. "His wife?" she repeated. "Oh, Lord, it's also." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Marcus told us his wife was dying," she said. "Cancer. Said you couldn't travel. Said your immune system was shot from chemo." I didn't react outwardly. Internally, the structure finalized itself. "So that's who I was here," I said. She nodded. We all felt sorry for him, running back and forth between a sick wife and an old mother. She introduced herself as Ruth. She'd lived next door for years. "What happened here?" I asked. She hesitated, then spoke. "About 2 years ago, Helen stopped coming outside. Marcus said doctors ordered isolation. Then the fence went up. Tall, solid." Her eyes flicked toward it. "Didn't look like protection," she added. "Looked like containment." I tightened my grip on my bag. "There was renovation," she continued, "years back. But that finished a long time ago. After that, furniture trucks started coming. Expensive ones, appliances, big TVs." She paused. "And toys. Activisas." "Toys?" I asked. "Boxes of them," she said. "For a child." "A child. And voices," she added. "A young woman. Laughing. And a boy." Marcus always had explanations. I thanked her. She looked at me carefully. "You didn't know." "No," I said. "I didn't." I stood at the gate longer than necessary, not because I was afraid to go in, but because once I did, uncertainty would be replaced with fact. The key Marcus had locked away slid into the gate smoothly, recently oiled, maintained. The click was soft. The front door opened just as easily. The first thing I noticed was the heat. Constant, regulated, the kind you keep when someone inside can't tolerate cold. Then the smell. Air freshener, bleach, and beneath it something medicinal, persistent. The living room looked staged. New furniture, precise placement, no signs of wear. And the photographs. An entire wall covered in framed images. Marcus. Different places, different years, always smiling. Alone. There were no photos of me. No wedding picture. No shared memory. 7 years erased deliberately. I walked into the kitchen. Everything unused. New. On the refrigerator door was a child's drawing. 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. Above the tallest one, written in uneven letters, was a word I wasn't prepared to see: Daddy. At that moment, the truth wasn't shocking. It was complete. I didn't touch the drawing. I stood there longer than necessary, letting my breathing settle into something steady. When truth arrives all at once, the instinct is to react. I didn't. Reaction wastes clarity. I moved through the house slowly. Every room was intentional. Furniture chosen to look lived in, but not personal. A guest room that had never hosted a guest. A second bedroom set up for a child, neatly made bed, shelves of books arranged by color, not age. No clutter, no chaos. Order without warmth. The hallway at the back of the house ended in a single closed door, different from the others. Thicker, solid wood. A keypad lock installed where a normal handle should have been. That's when the house shifted from strange to deliberate. I checked the rest of the rooms first. Bathrooms, closets, storage. I wasn't searching for shock. I was mapping the environment, understanding how control had been designed into the structure. The keypad door waited. I tried the handle. Locked. On the wall beside it was a small clipboard. Notes, times, short entries written in Marcus's handwriting. 8, meds. 12, soup. 6, check vitals. Vitals. I stepped back. This wasn't a guest room. It wasn't storage. It was containment. I didn't guess the code. Guessing leaves evidence. Instead, I scanned the wall above the frame. A faint smear where fingers had brushed repeatedly. Muscle memory. I followed the pattern. The keypad beeped once. Unlocked. The room inside was dim. Curtains drawn tight. Air warm and stale. A hospital bed against the far wall. Helen lay there. Not asleep. Still. For a fraction of a second, my body didn't accept it. Then it adjusted. She had been dead longer than a month. I knew that from the paperwork, from the neighbors, from the smell that no amount of bleach fully erased. The bed rails were raised. An IV stand stood beside it, empty now. A small table held pill bottles, some prescription, some not. Labels peeled off. This wasn't end-of-life care. This was isolation. I didn't approach the bed. I didn't need to. The room told the story. A camera mounted in the upper corner. Old, but functional. A chair positioned to face the bed directly. Not for comfort. For observation. On the wall opposite, photos had been taped up. Marcus. A woman I didn't recognize. A boy. Different angles, different days. A family growing in real time. Helen had been forced to watch the life she'd been excluded from. That was the point. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door gently. Then I sat on the floor. Not because I was weak. Because decisions of this scale deserve stillness. This wasn't just deception. It wasn't even betrayal. It was orchestration. Marcus had maintained 2 lives by controlling information, by isolating variables, by locking away anyone who threatened the symmetry of the story he told himself, and he'd done it calmly, patiently, over years. I stood up and began documenting. I used the camera I'd brought with me. I photographed everything: the keypad, the logs, the medications, the room layout, the camera serial number. I recorded video, narrating dates and times quietly, clearly. Documentation doesn't argue. It waits. In the master bedroom, I found more. A second phone hidden in the back of a drawer. Powered off. I didn't turn it on. I bagged it. In the closet, behind winter coats, was a locked metal box. This one I opened. Inside were bank statements, a separate account. Lydia's name appeared repeatedly. Transfers marked support, school, medical. The amounts were precise, predictable, planned. At the bottom of the box was a manila folder labeled contingency. Inside were drafted documents, power of attorney forms, guardianship filings, medical consent papers unsigned but prepared, and one affidavit. It described me. Alara Quinn is emotionally unstable. Subject to depressive episodes. History of non-compliance with treatment. None of it was true. All of it was ready to be used. That's when the scope of it settled fully. If Helen had lived longer, this would have ended with a signature. If something had gone wrong with Lydia, it would have shifted to me. Marcus didn't adapt. He replaced. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I wiped surfaces I'd touched. I exited the house and locked the gate behind me. Ruth watched from her window. I nodded to her once. She nodded back. An unspoken exchange of understanding. I didn't call the police yet. I didn't confront Lydia. I didn't leave town immediately. Because leverage isn't built in moments of shock. It's built in silence. That night, I stayed at a small motel on the edge of Cedar Grove. I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, from sequencing. By morning, the plan was complete. I wasn't going to expose Marcus emotionally. I was going to dismantle him structurally. I didn't rush back. Returning too quickly would have signaled reaction. I needed distance enough to let my actions look procedural, not personal. From the motel room, I made the first call. Not to the police, to an attorney. I chose one outside Marcus's professional orbit. No shared firms, no overlapping networks. I introduced myself, stated my legal relationship, and asked a single question. If I suspect wrongful death and financial misconduct involving my spouse, what is the correct order of operations? There was a pause on the line, not hesitation, calculation. Documentation first, the attorney said. Then preservation. Then notice. Exactly. I arranged a consultation for the following morning. I emailed scanned copies of what I had documented, timestamps visible, metadata intact. The attorney didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "We proceed carefully." But this is serious. That word mattered. Not tragic, not shocking, serious. That afternoon, I went to the county clerk's office. Quiet, fluorescent, unimpressed by emotion. I requested copies of Helen Quinn's death records. Admission, discharge, time of death, attending physician. They were precise. Helen had been admitted alone. Marcus had signed as primary contact. No spouse listed. No daughter-in-law. I requested a copy of the burial permit. Private service. No next of kin, notified beyond the sun. That omission was actionable. Back at the motel, I organized everything into folders, digital and physical. Labeled clearly, neutral language. Facts don't need adjectives. The next morning, my attorney filed a preservation notice. All financial accounts tied to Marcus Quinn. All properties under his name. All digital communications related to Helen Quinn's care. That step doesn't accuse. It freezes. By noon, his primary account was flagged. A temporary hold placed pending review. That was when Marcus called. I let it ring. He called again. Then texted, "Is everything okay?" My card just declined. I didn't respond. Silence isn't avoidance when there's already a record. It's strategy. That afternoon, a formal complaint was submitted to Adult Protective Services, not emotionally framed, not speculative, chronological. Isolation, medication control, surveillance, lack of external medical oversight. APS doesn't move quickly, but they document thoroughly. By the time Marcus landed back in Chicago, the scaffolding was in place. I returned home that evening. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The apartment was quiet, neutral, safe. Marcus arrived an hour later. He looked tired, irritated, focused. "Why is my account frozen?" he asked. Not, "What's wrong?" Not, "Are you okay?" Procedure over people. "I filed notices," I said. He stopped walking. "For what?" "For my protection," I said. That was true. He stared at me, recalibrating. "Did you go to Cedar Grove?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. "Yes," I said finally. The silence stretched. "You had no right," he said. "No," I replied. I had standing. His jaw tightened. His voice lowered. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly," I said. "That's why I didn't call you." He took a step closer. I didn't move. "This will get messy," he said. "Public." "Only if you make it that way," I said. He laughed once, short, controlled. You think documents make you powerful? He asked. No, I said. They make me protected. That was when his tone shifted. You're emotional, he said. You're spiraling. Any lawyer will see that. I reached into my bag and placed a single document on the table. An affidavit. His affidavit. The one describing me as unstable. He went still. You prepared this, I said. Before anything happened. I courted. He didn't deny it. That's planning, I continued. Not reaction. He looked at the paper as if it might move. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to finish. He swallowed. What do you want? He asked. I met his eyes. For you to stop speaking. He didn't. But he sat down. That was enough. Marcus didn't speak again that night. Not because he agreed with me. Not because he was defeated. Because he was calculating. I let him. The apartment held the silence easily. It always had. We'd designed it that way, clean lines, neutral colors, nothing that forced conversation. Now it served a different purpose. Containment without locks. The next morning, I left early. Not to escape, to proceed. At 9 o'clock, my attorney filed a formal request for marital separation, effective immediately. Temporary orders followed financial non-interference, communication through counsel only, no access to shared documents or devices. Procedure creates distance faster than emotion ever could. By noon, APS contacted me. They had reviewed the initial materials. Additional investigation authorized, interviews scheduled. The room in Cedar Grove classified as restricted care environment. They didn't use the word abuse. They didn't need to. At 3, a representative from the bank called Marcus. I wasn't present. I didn't listen in. But when I returned home that evening, he was sitting at the table exactly where I'd left him the night before. He looked smaller. Not physically. Structurally. They're auditing everything, he said. Even accounts you don't know about. I know, I said. How? He asked. Transaction records, I replied. They leave trails. He stared at the wall. I was protecting people, he said finally. You don't understand the pressure. I didn't respond. Pressure doesn't explain preparation. 2 days later, Lydia contacted me. Not with anger, with confusion. She hadn't known about me. Not fully. She thought I was an estranged spouse who refused to divorce. Someone unstable. Dangerous. Marcus had been consistent in his framing. I sent her nothing emotional. Only dates. Copies of public filings. A single sentence. You were given a version designed to keep you compliant. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Within a week, she retained her own counsel. That mattered. The house in Cedar Grove was sealed, pending investigation. No one allowed inside. The fence that once hid everything now marked a crime scene. Neighbors watched quietly. No one said my name. And that was fine. Marcus moved out under supervision. He took only personal items. No documents, no drives, no files. Before he left, he stopped at the door. You could have talked to me, he said. That would have changed nothing, I replied. He nodded once, as if conceding a technical point. The divorce took 6 months. There were hearings, depositions, expert reviews, psychological evaluations, his, not mine. I was asked why I hadn't confronted him earlier, why I hadn't fought harder when things felt wrong. I answered honestly, because confrontation gives control to the person who's prepared. That answer ended the line of questioning. In the final ruling, the judge cited patterned concealment, intentional misrepresentation, and preemptive legal manipulation. End quote, slashed it, end quote. Words matter when they're chosen carefully. Marcus lost access to inherited assets pending resolution of Helen's estate. Several accounts remained frozen. Further proceedings were scheduled. I didn't attend the last one. I didn't need to. I moved. Not far. Just enough. A smaller place. Fewer rooms. More light. I kept what I needed. I let go of what had been curated to please someone else's system. Some mornings, I wake up expecting to hear his keys at the door. I don't. Instead, there's quiet. The kind that isn't empty. If you're listening to this and thinking, I would have noticed sooner, maybe you would have. Or maybe you're still inside something that rewards silence and punishes questions. Here's what I learned. Control doesn't announce itself loudly. It organizes. And freedom doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives with documentation, distance, and the willingness to let someone believe they're still in control right up until they aren't. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone in that. Thank you for listening.